Hello, everyone. This is your weekly forum with Bracha Meltzer, your radio host at Chazak Radio. As you know, I'm the director of TCL Coaching and a certified life coach. If for any reason you need to move away from your computer, you can call from a phone by dialing 401-283-6664. 401-283-6664 to continue enjoying the program. I'm honored to have my guests today, Rabbi Jeremy Stern, who's the executive director of ORA. ORA is the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot. It was founded in 2002 and is a non-profit organization assisting divorced couples in resolving contested Jewish divorces in a timely fashion and in accordance with the highest standards of Jewish law. ORA operates under the guidance of Rabbi Herschel Schachter, Rosh Yeshiva at the Rabbi Elchanan I was going to say Theological Seminary, and in cooperation with an extensive team of attorneys, rabbis, mental health professionals, and community volunteers. And we have Yael Machtinger. She is currently a PhD candidate in the socio-legal studies at York University in Toronto. She's twice awarded the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, and her doctorate dissertation, Sounds of Silence, is an socio-legal exploration of Servu-Get and Igun in Toronto. And she's also is a member of the Canadian Law Society Association, and most recently she participated in the Agunot Summit at New York University School of Law Tikva Center for Law and Jewish Civilization, correct?
We were both there, yeah.
Oh, you both were there. Wonderful. Okay, so welcome, Rabbi Stern and Yael. Please start, and we're going to start with ladies first, of course. Sure. We'll be politically correct. And tell us something about yourself, how you got involved with ORA, what made you be interested in Agunot in general.
Sure.
So fire away.
Sure. Okay. So I actually started my master's research in Toronto. I was just telling Rabbi Stern on a completely different topic, and I took a course on legal pluralism, which is multiple legal systems interacting with one another, and I was inspired to do one term paper on get refusal and Agunot, and that one term paper really spiraled, and that became my master's thesis and now my doctoral work. So my master's thesis really focused on Toronto. Now for my doctoral dissertation, I'm comparing Toronto and New York, and I'm trying to see if there are any differences, and I think in fact there are quite a few between Toronto and New York on how the community deals with the issue of get refusal. And I'm interested in the intersections between secular civil law and religious halachic legal systems. So that's sort of in a nutshell.
Great. And you, Rabbi Stern?
How I got involved, right?
Who are you?
Oh, who am I?
And how did you get involved?
Okay, so I'm the executive director of ORA, as you mentioned, the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot. I've been part of ORA since 2007. The way I first got involved, I attended a protest rally in Queens against a recalcitrant husband. And simply because I saw a sign up in YU at Yeshiva University about the rally, it seemed like an important thing to do, an important thing to go to. And I went. And I ended up leading some of the Tehillim, some of the chanting and things like that. And from there, I was in Smicha, I was in the rabbinical ordination program at the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, RIETS, of Yeshiva University, the Smicha program of YU. And I was looking for a rabbinic internship, and they were looking for a rabbinic intern, and so that's how I started the summer of 2007. And so I've been a part of ORA now for almost 7.5 years, and I've been the executive director for about 5 of those years.
Wonderful. So thank you both for telling us a little bit about how you got involved with ORA. I'd like, and I'm sure that there are many people in the audience who have heard the word aguna or get or mivuseret get, and really don't have an idea what does it mean. They know that a get is a divorce, but they don't really know what the problems are with Agunot, why she can't get a get, and also what is mivuseret get. Can you share that?
Sure. So first, the term aguna comes from the Hebrew word ogen, which means an anchor. An aguna is a woman who is anchored or chained to a dead marriage. And the reason that occurs is that in halacha, in Jewish law, the way that a divorce is transacted is by a husband giving his wife a get, a Jewish bill of divorce. It's a 12-line document written in Aramaic, in which he puts in her hands, as the Torah describes explicitly, and that's how the divorce is transacted. What happens tragically are situations where a husband refuses to give his wife a get, and the truth is, historically, classically in the Gemara, in the Talmud, an aguna, as described there, would be a woman whose husband is missing, let's say lost at sea. And so she's an abandoned wife or a wife with a missing husband. And so therefore we don't have proof that he's dead, and to demonstrate that they're no longer married because he's no longer alive. And he's also not around to either be in a functional marriage or to give her a get. And so she's trapped in this state of limbo. So that was the classical form of an aguna. But more contemporarily, we have the situation where we know exactly where the husband is, but his wife is actively refusing. The husband is actively refusing to give his wife a get. So that's the aguna as we have it, generally speaking, nowadays. And so in Israel, they refer to it as a mesurevet get, which is distinct from an aguna, which is the classical form, a mesurevet get, meaning a woman who is denied a get by her husband. Essentially, it means the same thing. We refer to an aguna nowadays, not only to the classical case of the missing husband, but also to a recalcitrant husband.
Thank you. In terms of an aguna, let's talk a little bit historically. As far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, that during the wartime, and certainly during World War II in the Holocaust, this was really a major issue. And one of the things that my mother always taught me was when you go to a wedding, you really are a witness, because you can say, well, they won't take me as a woman in a best in, but why it's very important for men when they are at a chuppah to be very conscious of the fact that they are witnesses, because they can then verify that, yes, this woman married so-and-so at such a time and in such a place. So let's talk a little bit about, one other thing, talking about the army in Eretz Yisrael. I know for a fact that there are many frum men who are in the army, when they will go out on miluim or there is war, they will have, and I don't know how this impacts, that they will have a get written and have given to a friend in case they are missing in action, or they, lo aleinu, are killed and are not able to be found. So what is the nature of a get refusal? What happens? Two people get married, they start off, everything's wonderful, they have dreams, they have hopes, they have children, and it doesn't work. Lo aleinu, it happens. They've gone to counseling, they've tried everything, it doesn't work. Now what? The wife wants out, and the man says no. So what happens now?
So what happens in these types of situations, the cases that we take on, let me say a little bit differently, the cases that we take on at ORA are situations where the wife has generally reached the end of the road. She's already tried the standard forms to get her get, and the husband has refused to comply. So generally speaking, she in America, she needs both a civil divorce and a Jewish divorce, a get. So she may work out the civil matters or the monetary issues, the financial issues, the custodial issues, either whether in a Beit Din or a rabbinical court. They may go to court for those issues. They may try to go to a mediator or something like that. But the only way to get a Jewish divorce is through a Beit Din, through a rabbinical court. So generally speaking, the cases that we take on are situations where the wife has already tried through the Beit Din to get her get, and that process has not been successful in ensuring that a get is given. So either one possibility is where the Beit Din has issued a seruv, an order of contempt against the husband, because he's refused to come to Beit Din, he's refused to comply with the process entirely, or the Beit Din has had a hearing on the issue, and they've ruled that he is halachically required to give a get, and he's refused to give a get. That's another type of case that we'll take on. And the third type of case that we'll take on are situations where the Beit Din process has failed or stalled for whatever reason. So, for example, if the husband says he wants to go to Beit Din A, and the wife says she wants to go to Beit Din B, and there's no way to compel him to go to her Beit Din or her to go to his Beit Din, and they might just be stuck in this process. And so we're there to facilitate the Beit Din process, to move it along, to ensure that it's worked out and that again is given through that process.
Thank you.
I can
Yes,
add a bit to
please.
that. Just about the nature of get refusal, it's a little bit different in Toronto because the standard protocol that Batei Din typically follow, which is to issue a hazmana or a summons to appear in court, has to happen 3 times. Then a hatra'at siruv, a warning of the issuance of a contempt order, and then a siruv, which is basically an order of contempt because a husband has refused to show up. That doesn't always happen. So when you ask somebody in Toronto, are there agunot in Toronto, you might get an answer, no, there aren't any, which is not, in fact, the reality. But the reality is that there has been no siruv issued, therefore, halachically speaking, there's no designation of somebody who's an agunah, because very often, unless there's a siruv, you can't get the designation of an agunah. So that's sort of a technicality where that's why I like to talk about women who are refused to get as misuravat get, but they're not necessarily agunot in the Toronto context because halachically they don't get the designation, but they are women who have been refused to get. So
either way they're stuck.
Either way they're stuck. It's just a technicality of legal terms, basically.
Okay. So, go ahead.
I was just gonna add to that and those are also situations that we'll take on as well, kind of related to what I was saying before, the situation where they can agree on a Beit Din, but really just generally speaking, a situation where the Beit Din process fails or stalls or doesn't even get off the ground to begin with in trying to ensure that a get is given.
All right. I'm just trying to visualize for a moment, if I close my eyes, as a woman, I have been married, let's say, 10, 12 years. Didn't work. I have 3 kids. And I've been 2 or 3 years trying to get a civil divorce, a get, and I'm stuck. I'm actually stuck. There's no way for me to move forward, which means, as far as I understand, that my social life is on hold. I can do nothing. I have to be very careful if I go out and a man may be interested in me. I can't pursue that. I have to be very, very careful and circumvent anything that might, I might see someone and I say, oh yeah, I'm really very interested in him, but I can't do anything. So I'm hung out to dry. And it must be excruciatingly painful. We talk about terms, but I'm trying to imagine the feeling of these women who, many of them may be young, some of them may be older, but either way, they're very much prisoners.
Right.
They're very much prisoners. So who does the get refusal impact most on? Is it the woman? Is it the children? Is it How does it affect the community? Tell me more.
So I think it's certainly all of the above, and yeah, you're nodding your head. So I assume you agree with that. There's no question that what you described quite well is the agony of an agunah. The sense that she's stuck in limbo, but it's beyond that. There's another element to it, which is what's really underlying this whole issue of Agunot, which is the fact that the women who are denied a get by their husbands, by definition, by being denied a get, by a husband repeatedly refusing to give her a get, they are victims of domestic abuse. Yes. And I think it's a really critical element to understand what she's going through. She's an abuse victim. Domestic abuse is not just about black and blue marks, right? That's an expression of domestic abuse. It's one terrible form of domestic abuse. But domestic abuse, abuse can be expressed in several ways. There's physical abuse. There can be psychological abuse. There can be financial abuse. There can be emotional abuse, and there can be spiritual abuse. And this is one of those elements. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's financial, it's social, as you described, in limiting her ability to have, interactions and things like that, to be able to move on with her life. Abuse is defined not by black and blue marks, but as a pattern of controlling behavior. A pattern of controlling behavior. And so that's what it is, this pattern, this repeated refusal for him to issue her a get. And so that's a critical element to it, that she's an abuse victim. And so what happens is abuse victims begin to try and compensate in their lives for the abuse that they're experiencing. So they'll decompensate in other ways, right? They will be limited in their way to their ability to function regularly with in their work, with their family, in their relationships, because so much of their emotional and energy and so much of their psychological strength and spiritual strength is being invested in trying to break out of this cycle of abuse, that they're just totally wasted and worn down when it comes to working on other aspects of their lives. So that impacts that impacts her interactions with her kids and with her family and with her friends and in her community. So yeah, the ramifications for this form of abuse are tremendous.
I can add to that. The nature of get refusal, who does it impact the most in Toronto, but other places as well? It really, I think, is important to note that this most often impacts women. I always get asked this question at conferences. Well, there are men who are refused to get by their wives, and I know that they exist, but I have yet to meet them. And I've done a year of interviewing intensively, both in New York and in Toronto, women who have been refused to get. And there's no question that while there might be cases of men who are refused the acceptance of a get by a wife, there is a disproportionate impact on women here. And that is compounded by the fact that women are also responsible most of the time for their children and for their homes. And so the fact that the halacha requires a husband to give a wife a get of free will, it ultimately places the first step into his hands. And if a husband is not interested in halachic forms of dissolution of marriage and just wants to move on with his life, there's a disproportionate fallout from that, right? A husband who moves on and has another union, which results in a child, he might be an adulterer, but his children, his progeny of that union would not be mamzerim, would not get the qualification of illegitimate children. Whereas a woman without a get, really her life is stalled, as you described. She really can't move on. And if she was to not concern herself with halachic dissolution mechanisms of getting a get, her children might have a future marriage without a get would be considered mamzerim. So there's an asymmetry here that impacts women, not only in the fact that they cannot initiate the giving of a get, but that it's in the husband's hands, and also, even if they don't concern themselves with halacha, that there's a disproportionate impact on the woman's progeny that might follow. So I think that it's important to stress that although there might be instances where a husband his wife is refusing to accept the get, there is still undoubtedly a disproportionate impact on women. This is still more a women's issue, I think.
I tend to agree with you. But before we go any further, let me do a radio announcement. You are listening to the Weekly Forum. I'm Bracha Meltzer, your radio host. I'm a certified life coach. This is Chazak Radio. And my guests today are...
Yael Machtinger.
And...
Jeremy Stern.
Thank you very much. And we're talking about Agunot in our community and ways that we can help them. We've been talking, now back to my guests, we've been talking a little bit about the impact and what happens. I'd like to talk a little bit about what steps are being taken, can be taken, whether it's by the Batei Din, by individuals, and ORA, of course, or somebody like me, who can have a positive impact in having a positive outcome so that women who are being held hostage, and I'm using the word hostage because that's how I see it. Abuse is you explained it very well, Rabbi Stern, about what abuse is. And what do we do? What do we do? And I know for a fact this is an issue that the Rabbanim have been working on for thousands of years, and it still exists. What do we do? How do we help? Which one of you want to take it?
Go ahead. First. Okay. Number one, going back to what we were discussing about abuse. What empowers abusers is the legitimacy, the justification, the support that they receive from their family, friends, and community. Without that support, without their family, friends, and community justifying their abusive behavior, denying their abusive behavior, excusing their abusive behavior, without that, abusers crumble, right? They have nothing to support them. And so what a huge issue here is building a community, building Jewish communities where abuse is never, ever justified, no matter the issues. Now, people are going to say, well, in this case or in that case, the husband is fighting a very difficult custody battle, or she, hung him out to dry with the finances or something along those lines. And you know what? There's no question that there are often very contentious divorce cases over very contentious issues, especially custody. And so those issues must be dealt with on their own merits, whether that's in a Beit Din setting, in a rabbinical court, or that's through the civil courts, or it's through mediation or arbitration or what have you. But issues of custody should be determined on their own merits, on the best interests of the children, not based upon a power struggle between who can hold a bigger gun to the head of the other side or get over the head of the other side. Same thing with finances. The get has to be taken off the table, and the attitude of the Jewish community must be, there's no excuse for a get not to be given. Just like it's never acceptable for a husband to beat his wife, it should never be acceptable for a husband to refuse to give his wife a get once there's no chance for reconciliation, for shalom bayis. So that's number one. Is that if we can change that attitude in the Jewish community, if people start saying, even if it's my cousin, my son, my brother, I will condemn it because it's abuse. In the same way that if he was beating her, I would condemn it. I'd say it's never justifiable. There's never a reason that you'd excuse a man for beating his wife, right? You can never say, oh, well, she burnt the cholent, right? So therefore he can beat you. Of course not, right? So too, we can never justify the refusal to give a get. And once we have communities that do that, we will pull out the rug from under these recalcitrant husbands. And to speak to Yael's point, and I want to hear what you have to say as well. And when we talk about recalcitrant husbands, so the truth is we have seen situations at ORA where a wife has refused to receive a get from her husband. Of the 500, 600 cases of contentious Jewish divorces that have come across our desks in the past 12 years since we were founding, 1 or 2% of our cases have been those situations. So just like in domestic abuse statistics in general, you find that the vast majority of abusers are men and the vast majority of victims are women, so too it's skewed even more with regards to get refusal. But it can happen. It's never come to a case where we've had a rally against a woman because it's never gone that far. Generally speaking, the cases of recalcitrance by women have been women who are entirely non-religious or anti-religious. The get is not important to them. Very rarely do we see prolonged refusal to receive a get by women, just like we see by a man. So I just wanted to clarify that. So yes, there are cases of agunim, right? But the vast majority of cases that we see are those of agunot.
Well, what was the question about how we solve this within our communities? I can speak to Toronto as, of course, it needs to be a social sort of, I would like to call it a bottom-up approach, rather than having major legal sweeping changes either from secular civil systems or from halachic legal systems. It really, in Toronto particularly, needs to come from the community, from the grassroots, and work its way up, because the issue is so taboo and so brushed under the carpet and not acknowledged in Toronto that for us to have open conversations about it, which has really only started to happen in the last few years since I started to mix things up and force people to have conversations about it, until that really can happen on broader scale, change will be very difficult. That's been the case. I mean, slowly the tide is beginning to turn, but in Toronto, we're in a position where we're almost 20 years behind, I would say, where we are in New York, generally speaking, within communities, which is, it's just not spoken about. We don't see it, the siruvim listed in a print like you see here in New York in the Jewish press. It just doesn't exist. So there's just no knowledge about it. When I first started working on this and I went to my own rabbi to ask about it, it was sort of like, don't ask, don't tell, don't talk about it. And that's the first problem, right? At least if we can have open dialogue and acknowledge that, yes, this issue persists in our community, that's the first step towards change, I think.
I hear you. I'm thinking about, we're talking about change and recognizing what, and you were saying very much, Rabbi Stern, and also you, Yael, how the women are being controlled by this. But what outside forces can be brought to bear on the recalcitrant husband? It's not like you can say, well, I'm going to take you to court so that you are going to pay child support. Somebody's going to have their wages garnished. It doesn't happen like that. But what can a community, you say you do rallies for ORA. I don't know whether the rallies are, supported very much, or whether or not, how helpful, I'm not judging it. I'm just talking about what practical, I'm someone who is very much into the practical aspect. Do we say, let's say the recalcitrant husband owns a store? Do we say we as a community are going to boycott the store? I'm just throwing it out. What do you have to offer?
Okay. I guess I can say that. I think I think it needs to be a sort of a grab bag of solutions here. I think that certainly there should, once there's community sanctions at the point of siruv, usually, I think rallies are very effective. I think they've proven to be impactful. in all the rallies that ORA has done. We haven't seen rallies in Toronto in many, many years, but I think they've served to be very impactful, and they do put pressure on the families. I mean, Jeremy can talk about this more, Rabbi Stern can talk about this more in a moment, and they do elicit reactions. They elicit reactions both from the community. We've seen this in some cases, who will take it further and, interact with the husband's place of employment or family members or whatever. And also that they might actually elicit a get. I think they're usually very impactful. In Toronto, I think, not allowing a husband in shul, not giving him aliyahs, not using his store, all that kind of stuff is very important, because as Rabbi Stern said previously, that sort of takes the ground away from him, right? It sort of disempowers him, when really all of this is about his power and control. So it's very effective to show that the community is not supporting this form of abuse. There are many other, legal halachic solutions that we can talk about as well, like the halachic prenup, and in Toronto, potentially the get law as well. But on a sort of more advocacy-based level, I think all of those solutions should be embraced.
You were talking about the legal issue. So I believe, and correct me because you'll know more about this than I, in New York, a woman who's getting a legal divorce, very often there is a get clause, if that's the correct term, so that she is, it will ease the way to get a get. Am I correct?
Yeah, do you want to?
Well, you're the expert on New York. I mean,
you've been researching it.
Which one wants to take it?
I'll take it, and Rabbi Stern can fill in or correct me. Well, there are get laws on the books in New York which are not so effective. I won't really talk about them. The halachic prenup, which is sometimes referred to as a get clause, which can be also inserted into regular prenups, is my understanding, is very effective. I think it's probably the most effective remedy that we have to date. I think the quote is it's effective in 100% of instances where people sign them. And that basically sets out that at the beginning of the marriage, the couple agrees that they never want to use the get as a form of abuse, and it sort of precludes anybody from getting sort of entrenched in their recalcitrance. I can explain the technicalities of it, more or less. I don't know if that's necessary for this forum. No, but I think Rabbi Stern can probably fill in. In Toronto, we don't use the halachic prenup for a number of reasons, both legal and hashkafic, which I think is problematic on both forums, but there is a get law in Toronto, which is, I would say, maybe slightly more effective and maybe slightly marginally more or less controversial than the New York get laws. But really what we need to see in Toronto is also this implementation of the halachic prenup.
But there are issues with the halachic prenup, because aren't there issues with the, because you're saying that you're going to get married, but I have an out. So help me here.
So I'm happy to talk about the halachic prenup, one of my favorite topics to talk about. Let's talk about potential concerns that people might raise about the halachic prenup. Let's do a little bit of a myth busting. Number one, I have never seen any tshuva, written anything by any posek, any leader in Jewish law, which states that the halachic prenuptial agreement creates an invalid get. So from a halachic,
an invalid marriage.
We'll get there. First myth. Oh, there are poskim, there are big rabbis who are opposed to the halachic prenup and think that it creates an invalid get. Actually, just yesterday, I spoke with Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, who stated to me quite clearly that it's his understanding the Beth Din of America's halachic prenuptial agreement does not create an invalid get. And that he thinks it's a very good idea for couples to sign it. This is the first time this is coming out publicly because I just spoke with him yesterday. I was on a plane coming back from Israel and I schmoozed with him about it. So I think that's important for people to understand. Rav Adi Yosef Zatzal endorsed the halachic prenuptial agreement of Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, Rav Asher Weiss, certainly, YU Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Willig, who drafted it, Rav Schachter, our posek, has endorsed it as well. So from a halachic perspective, I think that there's very, very little opposition to the halachic prenup, and one is on very, very, very solid ground from a halachic perspective. The question comes up: Are you casting aspersions at your marriage? Right? Are you giving yourself a way out? So the halachic prenup is no different than the ksuba. Right? The ksuba is also essentially a halachic prenuptial agreement, an agreement that a couple agrees to before they get married. The ksuba does not talk about romance, does not talk about love, does not talk about anything along those lines. The ksuba is a financial document that talks about what will happen for the benefit of the wife in the event of the death of the husband, or if he divorces her. It is about a financial compensation that she gets in the event of divorce or if the husband dies. So if people were to read the ksuba and understand what it means, they'd see it's not a romantic document at all, but we read it very proudly under the chuppah and we put it up on the walls of our homes. But the halachic prenuptial agreement is very similar to the to the ksuba, in the sense that it is a financial agreement signed before they get married, which protects the wife in the event of divorce. In the situations that I see, even in young divorces, I've never seen a situation where a woman comes to our organization and says, I want out of my marriage and I have my prenup, so it's no big deal. I mean, I don't think divorce is a simple matter in any sector of the Orthodox community, right? It's still a very big stigma on people, certainly in young divorces. But even and when people are older and now they have kids, that also complicates divorce. So I don't think people are taking divorce lightly at all. All the prenup does, it just ensures that the get is not going to be used as leverage. The prenup, indeed, has been 100% effective in assuring that a get is given in a timely fashion. In fact, when I signed the halachic prenup before my wife and I got married, I thought it was kind of romantic, because what I was saying to her is saying to my future wife, I love you so much and I care about you so much that I never want to hurt you. And that's simply what all that you're signing. You're saying, I'm not going to do something which is unconscionable, which is halachically a violation, which is immoral, which is abusive. If a guy is not prepared to say to his wife, I'm not going to abuse you, right, then she shouldn't marry him. And so that's how we see the halachic prenup. It's a commitment by the husband and the wife that they're not, even in the worst of times when they lose their heads in the event of a contentious divorce, they're not going to do something which they otherwise would never do and commit this abusive act towards the other party. And also the halachic prenup, which we generally use at ORA, is a version from the Beit Din of America, which is reciprocal, which creates a financial obligation to issue or receive a get by either party. So it obligates the wife in the same way that it obligates the husband in the get process, in the event that the couple can no longer reconcile.
That's a very nice explanation. Thank you. I like the idea of that the ksuba is not a romantic piece of paper. I remember, and there is something very different here in just talking in general about, just a little bit off topic, about ksubas. Here in America, when people get married, they don't have to bring their parents' ksuba. In Europe, when I grew up in Ireland and also in England, and when I came to America and I was getting married to my husband, I brought to my father-in-law my mother's ksuba. And he's European, he's from Poland, and he said, only a European would do this. What it was is also, it was a protection for the children that they were able to show their parents' ksuba and that they are their children are kosher. And in today's world, that has gone by the wayside. There was something that you mentioned, and I want to bring up, Yael. You mentioned about people not being allowed to get an aliyah in shul or to be allowed to have access to shul. We live in a world, certainly here in New York, you can daven Shachris in one shul, you can daven Mincha somewhere else, and Ma'ariv somewhere else. There's not the sense of community which, unless you're in the Hasidic world, where whether it would be Satmar or Lubavitch or Bobov or Rachman Strich or Bells or any of those, or Square, where there's a real sense of community, and the community would be able to bring to bear some pressure. In the more modern world, and if your husband is hopping from one shul to the other, people aren't going to know. How are they going to know? Because they don't have a relationship with this person. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's here for Mincha. Does he come every week? He doesn't come every week. So shul is not really an area where, unless you know the person has a Rav, and there are many, many people who today do not have a Rav that they go to on a regular basis. So outside pressure in terms of shuls is not really, in terms of my mind, is not really as viable as what it could be.
Yeah, I can speak to that. It's interesting. I mean, one of my main findings in my research when I've been interviewing for the past year women who are Agunot or refuse to get in New York and in Toronto, and what I found is that it actually is a non-discriminating phenomenon, meaning that women can find themselves refused to get across all spectrums of religious observance, across economic levels, ethnicity, meaning I've interviewed women who are rich, who live on Upper East Side apartments, who need food stamps to feed their children. I've interviewed women who are Ashkenazi and Sephardi and Bukhari. I've interviewed women who are in their 60s who are Agunot, who find themselves Agunot after 25 years of marriage and a bunch of children, or women who have been married a year and then find themselves as Agunot or don't even have any children. So really, there's no rhyme or reason to why one might find themselves in Aguna. So it's true that in some cases, taking a route of not giving a husband an aliyah won't be effective. That doesn't mean that in the cases where it would be effective, we shouldn't do it, right? It's a grab bag of solutions is what's important, right? So in the cases where we know that a husband is involved with a community or goes to a shul or a particular set of shuls, we must make it imperative that that husband will not be welcome at those shuls. And even if I know there's a woman that I interviewed in Miami, and the husband went from shul to shul, and the organization followed from shul to shul, and until he was not welcome in any of the shuls. So of course in New York that's very difficult to do, but on a grander scale in New York, you can publish it in the Jewish press, and ORA will do rallies in certain instances where it might be effective. I don't think any of those things alone is going to be enough. I think we need to compound those solutions.
I like the idea of what you're saying about publishing it in the press. The same way as you have births, deaths, and marriages. And I'm not trying to make light of this in any way. I really feel it hurts me very much. I know someone who has been in Aguna for nearly 30 years. And there's no way that she's going to be able to get a get, unfortunately. So I'm wondering whether we should take advertising in a variety of different newspapers. There are 10 people, and or would we then be liable if someone did that? Are we liable legally or even halachically from, don't laugh at me, from defamation of character?
So if I can speak to that, I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving legal advice. I want to make that disclaimer extremely clear. But based upon my understanding of the law, is that defamation is only when you are stating something that is not true about an individual. So if I say that I think Yael is a bad person, right, that's also not defamation, because that's my personal opinion. If I say that Yael just hit me, right, while we're on the radio right now, and that speaks poorly to her character and she can't have a friendly debate about an issue, so that might be defamation, right, if I were to say that publicly and it were to damage, her reputation or something along those lines, because that's patently false. So if you say, so-and-so has refused to give his wife a get, and there is, for 10 years, right? They've been separated since, 2004. It's now 2014, 10 years. That's a true statement. Or, as more generally, more commonly as it appears in the Jewish press, there is a seruv, an order of contempt against a husband for refusing to give his wife a get for 10 years, right? So that is a fact. And so therefore it's not defamation if it is factual. So as long as it's factual, that's fine. Now, I don't think there should be vigilantes. People should do this in cooperation and coordination with Batei Din and Rabbanim and perhaps with our organization. And I'm not looking for more cases. We don't charge for our services. We don't even accept donations from women or men in cases that we're working on, because we need to remain independent of individual cases. But if it's done properly through proper halakhic channels and with proper legal advice, I think that you can state factual information without it being a problem.
Thank you. I think we're running short. We're still on time. I wonder if we have a few more minutes. Hopefully. I wanted to know, having listened to both of you, you're both very articulate, that what kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? What kind of non-support, for example, when you want to go up and talk in front of a group of people, do you find that people are supportive of the Agunot question, or do you find that there is, it's very important. It's really a very important issue, and we'd love to help you. But not in our shul or not in our forum. I'm just curious whether, and what do you do with it when you do meet that?
Right. I face that a lot. In the few years that I've been working in Toronto, in multiple forums, I've had to deal with this. The first time I spoke about get refusal in my own shul, I won't name it, but it's the largest Orthodox shul in Toronto, so you can figure it out. One woman came up to me after and actually said to me, like, what are you doing? This is Achil Hashem, and this is Lashon Hara, and what are you saying? And women are embarrassed, and we shouldn't be talking about this in public. And I was so, I don't want to say put off, but it took me a moment, and I said, actually, this is not Lashon Hara, because of course I didn't mention any names, and in fact, we must be talking about it openly, and we shouldn't be embarrassed. If anybody needs to be made to feel embarrassed, it's the recalcitrant husband who's abusing his wife openly in our community, and we need to be talking about that. So it's hard sometimes coming up against communities or groups who are resistant to talking about this. It's understandable. I mean, there have been other things in the papers recently where, you might feel like it's Achil Hashem and it's airing out our dirty laundry in public, but the converse of that is we are risking a lot if we don't talk about it openly. We are condoning abuse, we are condoning, domestic violence within our communities, and we should not allow that to go on. In the academic setting, I get asked the question all the time, like, why don't you just get rid of religion altogether? And the problem is patriarchy. And of course, or in secular communities, when I interview women, they sometimes have that resistance, and that is also not a part of the, my reality, certainly not, but it's also not a realistic answer to the problem of get refusal, because women and men will always continue to be halachically observant. So it's not it doesn't suffice to say, let's just throw out the baby with the bathwater. The problem of get refusal is when an individual bad person takes advantage of what is perhaps a legal asymmetry, but with one which is a banal legal step, which in most cases of divorce is a seamless step. And it doesn't result in recalcitrance. It doesn't result in get refusal. So this is really an issue of individual bad people taking advantage and using halacha as another form of abuse, as another tool of abuse. So, those are some of the things that I face when I'm talking to groups out there. And those are some of my reactions to those responses. Even though you face resistance, I think it's quite clear that it only propels us to continue working on this topic. I don't think it makes us want to stop. I don't know, Rabbi Stern can add to that.
I just want to clarify for everyone in the audience, Yael is not divorced, is not an aguna. She is single. And if anyone out there is looking for a wonderful shidduch, please look at Yael. I really wanted to say that because I didn't want anyone in the audience to think that maybe you have a beef, you have a personal beef to work on, and so I wanted to clarify that.
That's true, and I do get asked that quite often. So.
Okay, go ahead.
So just to add to what Yael said, from my perspective, I think this is an important element of our approach at ORA. From my perspective, communities are not judged by the problems they face, but by how they face those problems. Right? All communities, in all times, throughout the world, Jewish communities, non-Jewish communities, we all have problems, right? No community is flawless. But the difference is whether you grapple with those problems and you say we're working on them and fighting to make a difference, or if you say no, it doesn't exist, or just sweep it under the rug. And from my perspective, for all sorts of problems in the Jewish community, we can't turn a blind eye to these problems, to abuse. From my perspective, it's a chilul Hashem that get refusal exists. It's a chilul Hashem that men refuse to give their wives a get. It's a chilul Hashem that men are abusing their wives, that they are violating halacha in doing this. It is a kiddush Hashem for a community to say, we will not tolerate this abuse within our midst. We are going to stand up for victims of get refusal, for victims of abuse. That's a kiddush Hashem. I think from the non-Jewish world and the secular media, the secular public, when they see a community addressing its problems, especially a religious community addressing its problems, fighting abuse, standing up for the victim, I think that's a kiddush Hashem. And not only that, that's our responsibility. The Torah talks about the sensitivity that we must have in hearing the cry of the orphan and the widow. Why the orphan and the widow? Because they are among the most vulnerable members of our society. An orphan and a widow have lost the supportive family structure, right? In particular, the husbands or the father in their community, who would be the head of the household. They've lost that supportive family structure, and they are therefore most vulnerable. And the Torah says that we have a particular responsibility to hear their cry and to protect them and to stand up for them and to make sure that their vulnerability is not capitalized on by someone who's gonna violate and abuse them. So we have a responsibility to do that, and so it's a chilul Hashem for us to turn a blind eye to these most vulnerable members of our society and to not help them.
Thank you very, very much. I'd just like to add before we wrap up that we have to also think about the children. How are the children, and not every aguna has a child, but those who do have children, how do these children look at their father or look at their mother? And you were talking about abuse. The children suffer tremendously because they very often, like the woman who is the aguna, don't have a voice. They can't, they're little, they're defenseless. They don't have the ability to say to their father or their mother, it's not fair. They may say the words, it's not fair, but they don't have the ability to really say, what are you doing to me? what are you doing to me? Why are you doing this to mommy? They don't have that because a father is an authority figure, just like a mother is. And the kids get very caught in between. And it's not just with agunas, it's in divorce in general. And we really need to become much more sensitive in not using the children as pawns, and that not holding out a get is a way of getting money or anything else. I'd just like you to know that you have been listening to Bracha Meltzer's weekly forum on Chazak. My guests this week have been
Yael Machtinger
and
Jeremy Stern.
And they have both been talking. They're very involved with ORA. Rabbi Stern is the executive director, and ORA, again, is the organization for the resolution of Agunot. And I'd like you to give your phone numbers in case anybody would like to contact you, whether it's to discuss the Aguna issue or to be able to help in any way, whether, I don't know whether the organization needs volunteers or you need other people to interview for your doctorate. So please give your number.
Sure. I do want to clarify that although I support ORA and they have been wonderful to me, I don't work with ORA or for ORA, although I do. Just to clarify, I am an independent academic from York University. My phone number is 416-873-7682. I would be happy to conduct interviews with women who are or currently Agunot or were recently Agunot, particularly in New York or Toronto. Thank you for having me. 416-873-7682, or you can email me at yaelmach@yorku.ca.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Stern?
So probably the best way to get in touch with us, check out our website, which we actually just launched a new site today. It's getora.org. Though our phone number as well at our office is 212-795-0791. Again, 212-795-0791. And for anyone, male or female, who's looking for assistance in the Jewish divorce process, ask to speak with Keshet Star. She's our director of cases who handles all requests for assistance and initial intakes and things like that.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And if you have any comments or suggestions, please contact me. It's Bracha Meltzer at TCL Coaching. My number is 718-252-5933. At 718-252-5933. And I want to remind you that winter is here. Each and every one of us have a unique light. Let's shine it by showing achdus, ahava, and compassion for everyone, whether it's the grocery clerk who is packing up your groceries, to your beloved parents who sometimes can make you mad, or to everyone else in between. Thank you again. Thank you very much, Rabbi Stern, to Yael. Cheerio, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. My guest will be Aliza Ben Shalom, the marriage-minded mentor. This is Bracha Meltzer signing off. Cheerio.